There is a substance flowing within you, the most sacred and subversive that humanity have ever identified.
But for 2 millennia, religious institutions have reduced it to a symbol. G.W. Carey called it the oil of Christ.
Yes.
The Gnostics knew it as the sacred secretion. Modern scholars dedicated his life to showing that true enlightenment does not come from above, but from the transmutation of this secretion, produced cyclically by the pineal and pituitary glands. What became rigid doctrine was, at its origin, a map of the body, the 33 vertebrae of the spine, the degrees of internal ascension, the 33rd degree of Freemasonry. Golgotha, the place of the skull, is not just a physical mount,
but the exact point where this force culminates within you.
The Gospel of Thomas, banned for centuries, reveals that the Christ to be followed is internal and is born within your own nervous system.
But you have been trained to waste this oil through distractions, vices, and illusions.
This secret was never lost. It was systematically suppressed, disguised as faith, ridiculed as pseudoscience, and sealed under empty liturgies, maintained only by tradition, not by transformation.
There is an automatic procedure within the human body which, if not interfered with, will eliminate disease, trouble, sorrow, and death, as stated in the Bible. George W. Carey wrote this in 1920 in his almost forgotten book, God-Man, the Word Made Flesh. And this discovery exposes the lie that organized religions have spent 2,000 years convincing humanity of, that salvation comes from outside, from a crucified Savior, from an enlightened guru, from a sacred institution, when the biological mechanism of enlightenment is literally pulsing within the spinal column of every human being at this exact moment. Medical science has already mapped the brain structures involved, identified the neurotransmitters released, and documented the physiological changes that occur when someone goes through what traditions call the second birth. What George Carey, physician and researcher, discovered at the beginning of the 20th century by decoding biblical allegories should have revolutionized both religion and neuroscience. But it was systematically ignored because it threatened the spiritual monopoly of institutions. The Christic oil mentioned in sacred scriptures is a real, measurable secretion that your pineal and pituitary glands produce in specific cycles determined by lunar position. When the moon transits through a person's birth zodiac sign, information that any astrological calendar provides with mathematical precision, these glands enter a state of hyperproduction that ancient initiates knew and consciously explored. This fluid, enriched with specific neurochemical compounds, naturally descends through the spine via the central channel, dissipating in the ordinary activities of life. Every burst of anger, every wasted orgasm, every alcoholic intoxication literally burns this precious substance, keeping the individual in a state of ordinary consciousness, like a computer perpetually running in safe mode. What makes this revelation particularly disturbing is its universality across cultures. The Egyptians codified the process in the 33 degrees of Osiris's initiation, not coincidentally, the same number of vertebrae in the human spine. The Hindus described with surgical precision the path of Kundalini through the nadis and chakras, mapping each energy center with its corresponding nerve plexus. The Gnostic Christians, before being systematically eliminated by the Church of Rome, openly taught that Christ lived 33 years to symbolize the complete journey through each vertebral segment until the resurrection at Golgotha, which means place of the skull in Aramaic, a direct reference to the process that occurs inside the cranial cavity. Samael Aun-Weor, considered the reformer of modern Gnosticism, synthesized these fragmented pieces of knowledge into a practical system in the 20th century. His revelations about the master glands as biological Joseph and Mary, perpetually generating the Christological birth, were confirmed decades later by research on endogenous DMT production by the pineal and the altered states induced by specific meditative practices. Modern neuroscience, without realizing it, has partially validated what mystics have always known, that the human brain is a complete pharmacy capable of producing natural psychoactive compounds under specific conditions. The question that should disturb any serious seeker is, why has this knowledge remained hidden? The answer reveals a conspiracy not of men in dark rooms, but of institutionalized ignorance. When you understand that you can activate your own process of Christification without intermediaries, without tithes, without submission to ecclesiastical hierarchies, you become spiritually autonomous. And spiritually autonomous individuals are impossible to control through fear of hell or the promise of paradise. This process does not require blind faith. It requires precise knowledge of lunar cycles, discipline to conserve vital energy, technique to consciously redirect it, and courage to face one's own psychological demons that guard each portal of ascension. The sacred mantras, Iao, Inri, Klim Krishnaya, are not arbitrary magic words, but specific vowel frequencies that create measurable resonances in the cranial cavities, facilitating the production and circulation of the sacred fluids. The evidence is literally engraved in sacred architecture. Gothic cathedrals with their twin towers representing the master glands, the central nave symbolizing the spine, the altar in the sanctum sanctorum corresponding to the cerebral thalamus, where mystical union occurs. Every authentic tradition has left the map. It remains to be seen whether contemporary humanity will have the courage to follow it to its ultimate consequences, discovering that the kingdom of heaven has always been, as Christ explicitly stated, within us, not as spiritual consolation, but as neurobiological reality awaiting conscious activation. The priests of ancient Egypt guarded a secret that could have completely changed the course of Western civilization. Within the deepest chambers of the pyramids, far from the eyes of the uninitiated, they taught that the resurrection of Osiris was not a myth about distant gods, but an instruction manual for awakening the divine power dormant in every human being. 33 degrees of initiation, the same number of vertebrae in your spine. Coincidence? Only for those who have never connected the dots that modern religions have made sure to keep separate. That serpent you see emerging from the pharaohs' foreheads in every Egyptian painting, the one archaeologists casually call the uraeus, marks exactly the point where your pineal gland is located now as you process these words. The Egyptians were not making decorative art. They were documenting a real process of brain activation that transformed ordinary men into beings with capacities we would today call supernatural. And they were not the only ones who knew this process. On the other side of the world, the ancient masters of India described exactly the same phenomenon, just with different names. The Kundalini, the fire serpent sleeping at the base of the spine, is not a beautiful spiritual metaphor to impress Westerners at yoga retreats. It is a real bioelectric force that can be measured with modern equipment when activated. The yogis mapped 3 main energy channels in the body, one feminine, one masculine, and one central, that correspond precisely to the nervous systems that Western medicine would take thousands of years to discover. They knew that when these 2 opposing forces balance, something extraordinary happens in the central channel, something that permanently transforms consciousness. The early Christians, those whom the Church of Rome made sure to hunt and systematically eliminate, knew this secret too. The Gnostics, a term that literally means those who know, were declared heretics, not for believing in something false, but precisely for knowing too much. Their Gospels, conveniently excluded from the official Bible and hidden in jars in the desert for 2,000 years, reveal a completely different version of Christ's teachings. In these texts, discovered by accident in 1945, Christ does not speak about salvation through faith. He speaks about awakening the inner Christ through specific practices involving vital energy. He who drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I myself will become him, says Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. This is not mystical poetry. It is a technical instruction about what happens when the sacred oil produced in the brain is consciously preserved and elevated. The Gnostics knew that when Christ said he would live for 33 years, he was encoding the exact number of transformations the energy must pass through as it rises through each vertebra until reaching Golgotha, which literally means place of the skull in the original language. George Carey, an American physician from the early 20th century, was the first to have the courage to publish these connections openly. He demonstrated that the fluid that protects our brain and spine, the cerebrospinal fluid, is literally the oil of joy mentioned in the scriptures. This fluid, when enriched with specific secretions from the pineal and pituitary, becomes the most precious substance the human body can produce. Carey proved that this oil naturally descends through the spine and is lost in daily activities, but can be consciously conserved and elevated back to the brain during specific lunar periods. What Carey discovered should have revolutionized both medicine and religion, but his discoveries were ignored, ridiculed, and buried. Why? Because if people knew they carry within themselves the complete mechanism of enlightenment, the entire spiritual control system would collapse overnight. They would no longer need priests, pastors, gurus, or any intermediary between them and the divine. The medieval alchemists knew this process too, but they had to hide it in elaborate codes to avoid being burned alive by the Inquisition. When they spoke about transforming lead into gold, they were not talking about physical metals. The lead was the dense sexual energy at the base of the spine. The gold was this same energy transmuted and elevated to the brain. The alchemical marriage, the union of opposites, the birth of the philosophical child, all of these were coded ways of describing what happens when the masculine and feminine forces of the body meet in the center of the brain. Samael Aunweor connected all these dots in the 20th century. After decades of investigating these practices in his own body, he revealed what all traditions were trying to say. The secret lies in sexual energy, not in the puritanical repression that religions preach, not in the hedonistic indulgence that modern society promotes, but in the conscious transmutation of this force through precise techniques that he detailed in dozens of books you can download for free right now on the internet. Recent scientific discoveries only confirm what these masters have always known. Researchers have discovered that the pineal gland contains crystals that respond to magnetic fields. It can naturally produce psychoactive substances in moments of profound mystical experiences. That specific meditative practices permanently alter brain structure. Science is finally catching up to what initiatic knowledge has preserved for millennia. All these traditions, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, describe the same process because it is universal, inscribed in the very architecture of the human body. You were born with this mechanism. It is operating right now, wasting the sacred oil while your attention disperses in 1,000 directions. The question is not whether this is real. The historical, mystical, and scientific evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether you will have the courage to apply this knowledge and discover through direct experience that the gods humanity has worshipped for millennia were just human beings who fully activated the divine potential you carry dormant at this exact moment. The substance that is descending through your spinal column at this moment is worth more than all the oil in the Middle East, more than all the diamonds in Africa, more than all the gold ever extracted in the history of humanity. And you are wasting it right now as you process these words because no one ever taught you what to do with it. This essence, which George Carey identified as the Christic oil of the Scriptures, is not a beautiful spiritual abstraction to comfort believers. It is a real neurochemical secretion composed of hormones, neurotransmitters, and specific proteins that your brain continuously produces in small quantities and in abundance during certain lunar periods. Modern medicine knows part of this substance as cerebrospinal fluid, but what doctors don't tell you, because they themselves don't know, is that this fluid drastically changes its chemical composition when the pineal and pituitary glands are activated simultaneously. During deep sleep, during near-death experiences, during orgasm, during deep meditations, these glands release compounds that transform this common fluid into something the ancients were right to call divine. Let's speak clearly about what happens with this substance in the life of an ordinary person. It is produced mainly during sleep, descends through the spine via the central channel, and is systematically destroyed. Every burst of anger burns a significant quantity. Every wasted orgasm, yes, wasted because it could be transmuted, eliminates the equivalent of weeks of production. Alcohol literally dissolves this essence, which is why all genuine initiatic traditions prohibit intoxicants during periods of spiritual work. Excess sugar, heavy food, chronic stress, everything consumes this precious oil, keeping the person in a state of perpetual spiritual poverty. Now let's get to what really matters, your pineal and pituitary glands. The pineal gland, the size of a grain of rice, situated in the geometric center of your brain, is not just a producer of melatonin, as basic medical textbooks teach. It contains calcite crystals, yes, real crystals inside your brain, that vibrate in response to electromagnetic fields. When activated through specific practices, it secretes not just melatonin, but compounds that science is only beginning to identify, substances that radically alter perception and consciousness. The pituitary, divided into two lobes like a miniature couple, is the ruler of the entire hormonal system of the body. But its role goes much further. Samael Aun-Weor identified it as Mary, the biological mother of the inner Christ. When it enters into harmonic resonance with the pineal gland, the biological Joseph, through the precise intonation of specific mantras, something extraordinary happens in the third ventricle of the brain, the chamber between these two glands. The fluids from both mix, creating what the alchemists called celestial dew, and the Gnostics called living waters. The process of transmutation is not symbolic. When you intone the mantra E-A-O, E vibrating in the pineal, A resonating in the heart, O reverberating in the sexual organs, you are creating a specific acoustic wave that travels through the spinal column. Ian Ree, Ignis Natura Renovatur Integra, Fire renews nature integrally, is not a decorative inscription on the cross. It is a vibratory formula that, when vocalized with the correct technique, creates sufficient pressure to force the sacred oil to rise instead of descend. Each of the 33 segments of your spine is a transformation station. The oil that begins as a dense physical substance at the base refines itself at each vertebra it crosses. The nerve plexuses along the spine, which correspond exactly to the chakras described by the Hindus, act as biological distilleries, purifying and potentiating this essence. When it finally reaches the brain, after passing through all 33 chambers of transmutation, it is no longer the same substance that began the journey. The thalamus, situated in the center of the brain between the master glands, is the true Holy of Holies of the human temple. When the transmuted oil finally reaches this chamber, what the scriptures call the virgin birth occurs. Virgin because there was no waste of seed. Birth because a new consciousness literally is born within the skull. The thalamus illuminates, and this is not a figure of speech. CT scans show intense electrical activity in this region during profound mystical experiences. The ancients were not writing poetry when they spoke about enlightenment. They were describing a real biochemical event where the brain, bathed by this transmuted and potentiated oil, activates normally dormant regions. Capacities considered paranormal, clairvoyance, telepathy, conscious astral projection, are natural side effects of this process. You don't need to believe this. Genuine masters have always said the same thing: don't believe, experiment. The knowledge is complete. The mechanism is in your body now. The instructions have been preserved through millennia, encoded but decipherable. The only variable in the equation is your decision to apply or continue wasting. Each lunar month offers a new opportunity. Each wasted cycle is one less step on the ladder of 33 degrees that separates the sleeping human from the awakened Christ. The moon is not just pulling the ocean tides. It is, at this exact moment, creating tides within your body, moving fluids that conventional medicine pretends not to notice. The cerebrospinal fluid, the blood, the lymph, all respond to lunar cycles with the same obedience that the Atlantic demonstrates twice a day. Psychiatric hospitals record spikes in admissions during full moons, maternity wards prepare extra teams, and emergency departments arm themselves for chaos. Everyone knows something happens, but no one officially admits what. But the initiates have always known. The moon is the cosmic metronome that regulates the production of the sacred oil. To discover your period of maximum power, you need information that is freely available on any astrology website. When the moon monthly enters the zodiac sign, it occupied at the moment of your birth. We're not talking about magazine horoscopes, we're talking about basic astronomy. The moon takes approximately 27 days to complete its cycle through the 12 signs, remaining about 2.5 days in each one. When it returns to your natal sign, your master glands enter a state of hyperproduction that the ancient Chaldeans had already mapped 5,000 years ago. The preparation begins 3 days before the moon enters your sign. This is not a mystical suggestion, it is a biochemical necessity. Your body needs this time to clean the channels, adjust hormonal production, and prepare the ground for the work. During these 3 preparatory days, every substance you ingest, every emotion you allow to dominate you, every thought you feed, is determining the success or failure of the operation. Alcohol must be completely eliminated. It literally dissolves the oil before it even begins to rise. Heavy food congests the channels. Wasteful sexual activity exhausts the reserves before the work begins. When the moon finally enters your sign, initiating the 2.5 days of maximum potency, something measurable happens in your brain. The pineal, containing magnetite and calcite crystals, responds to variations in the lunar magnetic field like a biological antenna. Melatonin production alters, but more importantly, compounds that science has not yet completely catalogued begin to be secreted. The pituitary adjusts all its hormonal production, creating a unique neurochemical cocktail that only happens in this specific temporal window. The 2.5 days plus the 3 of preparation total 5.5 days of intensified work, your monthly period of initiatic possibility. But here's the problem that destroys most seekers. Kundalini is not a docile force waiting patiently to be awakened. It is liquid fire, condensed electricity, pure power that can both illuminate and incinerate. Kundalini syndrome is not a New Age invention. It is documented in medical literature, with cases of people hospitalized for awakening this force without adequate preparation. Burning sensations along the spine, unbearable cranial pressure, hallucinations, depersonalization, the price of playing with fire without knowing the laws of fire. That's why psychological work is not optional. It is a matter of spiritual survival. Every psychological defect you carry, and you carry all of them in different degrees, is a real energetic blockage in a specific center. Lust in the second chakra is not a moral concept. It is an energetic obstruction that prevents the serpent's passage. Anger in the solar plexus is not just an emotional problem. It is a knot that can cause the energy to deviate into wrong channels. Pride in the cardiac chakra, lies in the laryngeal, illusions in the frontal. Each one is a guardian that needs to be conquered, not with force, but with understanding. The Gnostics called these defects guardians of the threshold because they literally guard the passage between worlds. When Kundalini begins to rise and encounters the blockage of lust in the second chakra, you're not going to have a beautiful spiritual experience. You're going to be confronted with every repressed desire, every hidden fantasy, every denied perversion. If you haven't done the psychological work of understanding and dissolving these aggregates, the energy will feed them instead of dissolving them. This is how mystics become sexual predators, how enlightened gurus end up in scandals. They awaken the force without cleaning the house first. The Sanskrit mantra, Klim Krishna Ya Govindaya, Gopijana Vallabhaya Swaha, is not just a traditional devotional practice. It is a precise vibratory sequence where each part works progressively through the energy centers. The first part, Klim, activates the force in the basic center of the spine. Krishnaya elevates this energy to the second chakra. Govindaya promotes transmutation in the solar plexus. Gopijana Vallabhaya expands the force through the cardiac center. And finally, Swaha releases the energy to continue its ascension to the brain. The mantra facilitates the process, but does not replace the internal work. The true practice is constant self-observation, identifying each psychological defect the moment it arises, and consciously choosing not to feed it with energy. The physical preparation follows a specific protocol. 3 days before the lunar period, completely eliminate alcohol, reduce animal protein, and increase pure water to 3 liters daily. Mugwort tea activates the pineal gland. The active principle of this plant crosses the brain's protective barrier and interacts with documented receptors. Gotu kola improves cerebral circulation according to published studies. Peppermint contains compounds that facilitate the production of neurotransmitters. Partial fasting during the 2.5 days is not penance. When you digest heavy food, a large part of your vital energy diverts to the digestive system. Fruits, raw vegetables, and natural juices, light foods release maximum energy for the work of transmutation. Every heavy meal during the lunar period means waiting another month until the next cycle. Breathing throughout the entire period follows a specific pattern. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold empty for 4. This rhythm, practiced consistently, creates waves in the cerebrospinal fluid, facilitating its ascension. All contemplative traditions emphasize breathing because the breath moves more than air. Warm baths, never hot, excessive heat disperses energy. Final cold showers conserve and direct force internally. Every detail responds to subtle processes sensitive to minimal variations. This knowledge represents science forgotten by the modern world. During the 5.5 days, every choice supports or sabotages your Christification. People waste 12 to 13 annual opportunities. A lifetime of conscious work would offer hundreds of initiatic chances. The lunar clock continues marking cycles available for whoever decides to work seriously. The posture for the work of transmutation determines success or failure before you even begin. Sitting on the floor or on a firm chair, your spine needs to be perfectly erect, creating an unobstructed channel from the base to the top of the head. This is not a matter of religious tradition or Eastern mysticism. It is pure anatomy. When you curve the spine, you compress the nerves and restrict the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. When you keep it straight, everything flows. Base firmly supported, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly tucked to align the cervical vertebrae. The tongue lightly touching the palate just behind the teeth. The Taoists have taught this for millennia because it closes the energetic circuit between the frontal and dorsal channels of the body. Simple, direct, effective. The work begins with perception, not imagination. At the base of your spine, where the sacrum bone guards its sacred name, there is real accumulated heat. Not because you are imagining it, but because the concentration of nerve endings there responds to your focused attention with increased metabolic activity. Feel first. Visualization comes later. This distinction between feeling what is happening and imagining what you would like to happen separates real work from spiritual fantasy. Deep rhythmic breathing is not optional, it is the engine that moves the process. Each complete inhalation creates pressure changes in the thoracic and abdominal cavities that directly influence the movement of cerebrospinal fluid. Inhale deeply through the nose, hold for a few seconds, and exhale completely through the mouth. With each cycle, you are creating subtle waves that rise up the spine. The fluid that protects your brain and spinal cord really moves in waves influenced by breathing. The mantras follow precise logic. Ia-O represents the Gnostic formula of the Trinity, the first letter symbolizing the Father, the second the Son, and the third the Holy Spirit. In practice, each vowel sound vibrates in a specific region of the body. The first sound, similar to the E in C, resonates in the head, creating cranial vibration. The second sound, like the R in Father, expands through the chest, opening the cardiac center. The third sound, like the O in Home, descends to the belly, activating the lower centers. The mantra Ienri, from the Latin Ignis Natura Renovatur Integra, meaning that fire renews nature integrally, must have each letter vibrated according to its original Latin sonority. The Sanskrit mantra Klimkrishnaaya maintains its traditional Vedic pronunciation, invoking the Christic consciousness to facilitate the rise of energy. The specific visualization now becomes crucial. You are not imagining generic light or abstract energy. Visualize the sacred oil, golden, thick like luminous honey, beginning to rise from the base. Vertebra by vertebra, each one of the 33 segments is a transmutation chamber where this substance refines itself. What begins dense and oily at the base becomes more subtle and luminous. With each step it climbs. Samael Aunweor emphasized, don't skip steps, feel the energy consciously traverse each segment. When this force encounters blockages, and it will encounter them, you breathe through them. Don't force, don't push violently. Breathe, maintain the visualization, intone the specific mantra for that center. In the second chakra, where lust creates obstruction, the mantra gradually dissolves the resistance. In the solar plexus, where anger has crystallized, the vibration softens the blockage. Infinite patience. You are undoing patterns of a lifetime, possibly of many lifetimes. The crucial moment happens when the energy reaches the center of the brain. The thalamus, that small chamber between the pineal and pituitary glands, is the true altar of the human temple. Visualize it progressively filling with the transmuted oil that now shines like liquid gold. It is not diffuse light or a colored aura. It is a thick, luminous substance filling a specific space in the center of your head. Feel it pulse with each heartbeat, expand with each breath until it overflows and bathes the entire brain. At this moment, according to Gnostic traditions, the three internal wise men converge. The solar channel, Pingala for the Hindus, brings the gold of divine wisdom through the right cerebral hemisphere. The lunar channel, Eye Day, offers the incense of unconditional love through the left hemisphere. The central channel, Sushumna, delivers the myrrh of conscious sacrifice that allows the death of the ego and resurrection of consciousness. These are not poetic symbols, they are descriptions of real bioelectric currents converging in the center of the brain. The changes that occur are neither subtle nor gradual when this process is completed. Capacities considered paranormal begin to manifest naturally. Clairvoyance, the ability to perceive beyond the normal visual spectrum. Clairaudience, hearing frequencies beyond common reach. Intuition amplified to the point of seeming like a premonition. Lucid dreams that are more vivid than waking life. Out-of-body experiences that happen spontaneously during deep meditation. But these are consequences, not objectives. The true result is the permanent activation of normally dormant brain regions. Neuroscience has discovered that we use only a fraction of brain potential. Not the mythical 10%, but certainly not the totality. When the sacred oil completes its circuit and bathes the brain, synapses that have never fired begin to connect. Completely new neural network form. You are not becoming something different. You are activating what was always your potential. The implications for daily life are profound. Superficial relationships become impossible to maintain. You perceive the masks, the lies, the ego games with painful clarity. But you also develop genuine compassion because you understand that everyone is fighting the same internal battles. Purposeless work becomes unbearable, but clarity emerges about your true mission. The need for constant entertainment disappears because the meditative state becomes more interesting than any external distraction. The process continues deepening with each lunar cycle. It is not a single achievement that you attain, and that's it. Each month, when the moon returns to your sign, you have a new opportunity to climb the 33 steps with greater mastery. The oil becomes more refined, the ascent smoother, the transformations deeper. Eventually, the Christic state, consciousness permanently established in the crown center, becomes your natural condition. You carry within yourself everything that is necessary. The instructions have been preserved through millennia. The lunar cycles continue offering monthly opportunities. The only variable is your decision to apply the knowledge with discipline and persistence until the inner Christ definitively awakens in the illuminated thalamus of your own cranial temple. The sacred oil produced by your master glands continues descending through the spinal column in constant cycles, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, being wasted in ordinary metabolic activities. George Carey documented that the amount lost in a single day would be sufficient for an entire month of conscious work if it were preserved and transmuted. However, you never learned this in school, church, or university. Why, let's definitely connect the fragments that have remained separated by design, not by accident. The Egyptian priests structured 33 initiatic degrees corresponding to the vertebrae. The Hindu yogis mapped the path of Kundalini, coiled 3.5 times, exactly as the vagus nerve coils anatomically. Christ publicly demonstrated the process by living 33 years and dying at Golgotha, the place of the skull where the final transmutation occurs. Coincidences, or a map left in plain sight for all, but understood by few? Samael Aun Weor decoded what was fragmented. The pineal and pituitary glands are the biological parents of the inner Christ that is born in the thalamus. The sacred mantras, Iya, O, Inri, Klim Krishnaya, create specific vibrations that alter the chemical composition of the cerebrospinal fluid. The moon influences periods of glandular hyperproduction through its magnetic effect on the calcite crystals in the pineal gland. Every piece of the puzzle fits perfectly when you understand that the human body is the temple, the laboratory, and the altar where the great alchemical work takes place. Modern medicine confirms aspects that it should investigate completely. The pineal gland contains magnetite and responds to magnetic fields. The production of endogenous dimethyltryptamine during mystical experiences. The alterations in cerebrospinal fluid during deep meditative states. The hemispheric brain synchronization during mantra chanting. The evidence is in published studies, but no one connects the dots because doing so would destroy established paradigms. The protocol is complete and available. Identification of the lunar period through any astronomical ephemeris. 3 days of physical preparation with elimination of intoxicants and dietary reduction. 2.5 days of intensified work with mantras, rhythmic breathing, and visualization of the golden thalamus. Progressive dissolution of psychological defects that block each center. Gradual ascension through the 33 vertebral degrees. It is not a belief system, it is precise spiritual technology. Why then has this remained hidden for millennia? Because individuals who activate the inner Christ don't need intermediaries. They don't pay tithes, they don't follow dogmas, they don't fear imaginary hells or wait for promised paradises. They become spiritual sovereigns, impossible to control through traditional religious manipulation mechanisms. A Christified human being is dangerous to any system based on hierarchy and submission. The consequences of activation are irreversible and can be documented. Increased activity in normally dormant brain regions, synchronization of the cerebral hemispheres, elevated production of neurotransmitters associated with expanded states of consciousness, amplified perception beyond the common sensory spectrum, access to capacities considered paranormal, but which are just the normal functioning of a brain operating at full capacity. The parallel psychological work is not optional, it is protective. Every undissolved defect becomes amplified when the energy rises. Lust turns into obsession. Anger becomes violence. Pride inflates to megalomania. This is why so many gurus fall into scandals. They awaken the force without cleaning the psychological house first. The gradual monthly ascension allows systematic work with each aggregate, ensuring that the energy finds clean channels to rise through. But there exists a catalyst that amplifies the entire process exponentially. The deep meditative state, where brainwaves slow to theta and delta frequencies while maintaining waking consciousness. In this state, the master glands maximize production, the barrier between conscious and unconscious dissolves, and the sacred oil flows with multiplied potency. Tibetan monks know this. Indian yogis master this. Christian mystics have experienced this. All discovered the same truth. Deep meditation is the key that unlocks the complete potential of the process. It is in this specific state that true alchemy happens, when mind, body, and spirit align in unique frequency, when breathing, mantra, and visualization converge in perfect synchrony, when the transmuted oil finally reaches the thalamus, the inner Christ awakens in the cranial temple, not as a metaphor, but as a measurable neurobiological event. All change begins with understanding your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "This made sense to me,"